Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. Jess, how's your week been?
Actually, I had a very exciting week this week because I had a friend visiting from LA, and we had a very cultural day this week. We went to see an exhibit. I know I'm normally never this cultural, but we went to see an exhibit of Nara, who's a Japanese artist, and I'm sure you'll recognize some of his stuff, but it's very cool. And so we went and saw that, and then we also then went to see the stage show of My Neighbor Totoro, which is one of her favorite
I saw your pictures of that. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was the cutest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I can confirm that CatBus, the giant bus shaped like a cat, does have furry balls in the stage show, because he's got furry balls in the animated movie, and they kept that tiny detail.
Wow. You learn something new every day. I did not know about this, but I can tell you it's made my life that much more richer.
There you go. Just in case you didn't know, CatBus has furry balls.
I'm going to have to look that up 100%.
I'll send you a screen grab.
I definitely did not have as an exciting a week as furry balls. I guess how do you follow that up? How do you follow that up? I don't know.
I made you speechless. I don't know if that's ever happened before.
That is rare. That is definitely rare. I guess I'm just going to end with, I'm going to go to the beach, birthday party, play some football, and we'll be thinking about furry balls for the rest of the time. I'll tell you that.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I could give you that mental image. Wow. Yeah. Congratulations. Lucky me. You're welcome.
Really appreciate that. Well, clearly we're doing things a bit differently today. So let's keep that going.
So Kyle, what are we doing this week?
I'm really going to update one of our earlier episodes, our episode 3 on prompt engineering. And I got great feedback on this. I know it was super helpful to a lot of people of all levels.
It's one of our most popular episodes, actually.
Yeah, it really is. So I know we thought it would be useful to go back to this, given, the recent, launch of ChatGPT-5. And I think this shows how fast the space moves. That was 12 episodes ago, 3 months roughly. Yeah. But it feels like a different era. So much has happened in that time.
Yeah. When we recorded that back in, I think it was the end of May, GPT-4 was state of the art. The context window was really small, and most people were just kind of trying to figure out how to get ChatGPT to stop giving them the really generic responses, which is why that episode on prompt engineering was so useful and so popular. And now GPT-5 has come into effect as of a couple of weeks ago. We've got some massive context windows, which makes a big difference. And that means that there's a not completely new, but a pretty new approach to prompting.
Totally. I've been testing GPT-5 pretty extensively. In fact, I've been using it. I've kind of switched back from Claude over to GPT-5.
Wow.
I know.
Big words.
Big words. But, I've gotten really good results, but I've found some of our original advice doesn't just need updating, kind of gives subpar results now. So GPT-5 isn't just faster, it's more accurate, less likely to hallucinate, and I have found a little less sycophantic.
Which is great news.
Great news, but it means the way we prompt has to be, sharper and more intentional.
And I think actually we've got some research that we'll talk about that kind of backs some of that up in how things have changed. Yeah. So if you listen to our original prompt engineering episode a couple months ago and thought you had it all figured out, I'm sorry to say, buckle up. We're about to get into it again. We're going to show you why, if you really master prompt engineering, it gives you a huge advantage, because it really does make all the difference and makes AI that much more effective. Right. So before we dive into the technical stuff, we're just going to recap again why this actually matters for our audience, for entrepreneurs and small business owners. Because like when we're working with clients, or when you're, working with your customers, we're not using AI to do something like writing poetry. And let's face it, it's probably not going to write the best poetry. We need investor ready board updates, client emails that actually sound like they came from me specifically, or, insights from sales data that we can actually act on, it's actually useful information.
Just a quick aside, Jess, I beg to differ. I have been using it to write a little bit of poetry, and it has helped me out, and it has been quite good.
Are you, seriously?
Okay,
I think... stand corrected. I never would have thought that you would be using it to write poetry, but there you go.
Poetry, if for this and that, but my family has probably noticed a noticeable difference in the quality of my card writing.
Look, that's a great use case. Why have we never talked about that as a use case? I never know what to write on birthday cards or whatever. It's always there we go.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But this is where prompting becomes very critical, right? So vague prompts give you vague results. Bad data in, bad data out. You don't want a fluffy 2-paragraph response when what you need is a bullet point risk assessment for your CEO, your CFO, etc.
Exactly. And, it's not too dissimilar to working with a team or an agency. If you've ever worked in a team that oversees a creative agency, because if you can't brief someone clearly, you won't get the good work back. If you just give them a vague brief, you're going to get that vague response back. And AI is exactly the same, except now with GPT. God, I'm really struggling to say GPT-5. Okay, let's try that again. Chat GPT-5. The stakes are higher because it actually follows instructions so precisely that it matters even more now than it perhaps did before.
It's the difference between managing a junior employee who kind of gets what you want versus managing a senior employee who will follow your instructions to the letter. Even the poorly worded ones, and that's going to become very important distinction here. GPT-5 is more like a contract lawyer than an intern. It will execute the contract exactly as it is written, whether you phrased it correctly or not.
Which can be an issue if you're not careful. We've seen GPT-5 get stuck trying to follow contradictory instructions that GPT-4 probably would have just ignored. So that's an interesting and significant difference between the two models. So businesses that really master that clear communication with AI are really going to have a massive advantage in this space.
I think that's really an important distinction to focus on. This, if you give it contradictory instructions, how it's going to trip up the model. And what's changed since our original episode, we used to focus on getting, AI to understand us. How do we, give it the context? Now it's about being precise enough for AI that it actually listens. So let's walk through what's actually new with GPT-5. So first up is reasoning. We've talked about this before, but I think we can recap because it's really important. GPT-4 was decent at working through problems, but GPT-5 has what OpenAI calls a reasoning router. This is actually kind of a little agentic, right?
Okay, so what is this reasoning router then?
Yeah, so think of it like having an employee who can automatically decide whether to give you a quick answer or really think it through. So GPT-5 has a fast mode for simple stuff and a deep thinking mode for complex problems. And the key is you can control which one it uses. You've probably seen this when you've typed in a response to GPT-5. You see it come up with a little bit of text that says thinking through, and you can say, or give me the quick answer.
So that's a useful thing to be able to switch back and forth between the two, because I think that was one of the initial criticisms around this.
Yeah. And if you add phrases like think through this step by step or analyze this carefully before answering, GPT-5 will shift into that deeper reasoning mode. It's like telling someone, take your time on this one. Now, honestly, most of my prompting that I do, it tends to go into the deeper reasoning, right? And we'll talk about when we should use deeper reasoning so we can kind of get into that kind of strategic lens of what to use. But typically I see that deeper reasoning, but sometimes you may want to click on just, hey, do the quick analysis.
This is actually a great feature. It's a really interesting feature that they've introduced because some questions don't need a big, long deep response. It can be a little
Yeah.
bit more high level. And then obviously some of them need a much deeper or more real analysis. So if I want to ask, what's the weather today, that doesn't need a big, long, deep,
Mhm.
response. But if I'm asking like, what are the risks in this partnership agreement, then obviously you want it to go really deep and you want it to really think about that.
Exactly. The next big change for GPT-5 is the context length. Now, I'm very happy about this, as you know, because I constantly am
Yes.
talking about data, data, data.
Yes.
But, remember in our original episode, we talked about GPT-4 handling maybe, 8,000 tokens or 32,000 tokens. And again, we talked about tokens, kind of combinations of words.
And we had to be so careful about what we included because it would very easily or quickly rather
Mhm.
reach the limit of the token. So that this is a good addition.
Yeah. And, and just to go even farther back than GPT-4, if we talk about some of the original like GPT-3, there was this kind of needle in the haystack where the more context you gave it, actually the worse that your output would be because it
Hmm.
was difficult in finding those specific things. Well, that's really no longer the case. GPT-5 is a lot better at that needle in the haystack performance. And GPT-5 handles 400,000 tokens.
Wow.
So if you think about that, that's roughly 800 pages of text.
That's substantially larger than GPT-4. So like right now, if I'm pulling together something like a campaign strategy, I've got to summarize everything. So that's the brand guidelines, competitor analysis, customer research. But with GPT-5's 400,000 token context window, I can just include all of it and it's going to synthesize that strategy without losing any details. So for any business owner or for an entrepreneur, that means that you can add much more context, much more rich detail without having to be as discerning as in what you provide. So it might be a bit of an overkill, but we constantly are talking about the importance of context.
That's exactly the point. No more chopping up documents or losing context. And you don't also have to worry that it's going to find the right context. Give it the full picture. Where it gets really interesting is what GPT-5 has what researchers call surgical precision in following instructions. So it's the most steerable model OpenAI has built to date. So tone, length, format, even output structure follow your words exactly. But that precision also means that vague or, as we talked about earlier, conflicting prompts can cause it to stumble where GPT-4 would have just glossed over it. For example, if I give it contradicting instructions, GPT-4 would have just followed the last one. Now GPT-5 will try to get it to answer both, which is going to confuse it. So if you tell it, format this as a table, use a professional tone, keep it to 3 bullet, and it does exactly that. But there's going to be a catch.
What's the catch?
So if you contradict yourself in the prompt, like saying be brief early on, but then asking for a detailed analysis later, that's where GPT-5 gets confused, trying to reconcile both instructions. GPT-4 would have just picked, that latest one and moved on.
So it's more obedient, but it's also more literal. So from a management perspective, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like good employees follow instructions precisely, which means you better give them good instructions. Whereas ChatGPT-5 is less sycophantic than ChatGPT-4, so it won't just agree with you or fill in the blanks that you left vague. So it's pros and cons.
That's a perfect analogy. And I think we've heard a lot of people complain about the new version. And I think there were some growing pains, but I think when people are saying, I'm not getting as good of results, I think it points to this issue in prompting. And, not a lot of people have the tools where they realize that this is the issue.
That's a really good point that I think most people are not going to be aware of, because I was just talking about this with a friend the other day who is really hating ChatGPT-5. So that would actually explain a lot in that she's not changed her way of prompting, but
Yep.
actually it does make a big difference.
Using prompt frameworks is going to get you most of the way there. But again, to the point of this episode, we need to update it a little bit.
Totally.
Now, the last major change that I think affects how we prompt is GPT-5 has built-in personality modes. And this is really, really interesting.
Yeah. So tell me about this, because this actually sounds really relevant for brand voice, which is obviously a very important thing.
Yeah. So GPT-5 has 4 preset personalities.
Okay.
It has a robot for straight to business responses.
Okay.
It has a listener for empathetic communication, cynic for dry wit, and nerd. Love that one. For enthusiastic detail.
I feel like you and I are going to be nerd for enthusiastic detail. That feels like exactly what we're aiming to go for. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess that means instead of writing respond with empathy and understanding, which is kind of what you would have done in the past every time you're drafting something like a customer service email, you can just switch to listener mode. So it's kind of automatically got that built-in empathetic
Mhm.
feel to it.
Exactly. It has tone presets.
Hmm.
So for quarterly reports, I might use robot mode. Just give me the facts.
Yeah.
For team feedback, listener mode, right? Get a little bit more empathy. For brainstorming sessions, give me that nerd mode, where it gets really detailed about the possibilities and gives you potential paths to go down. For your deep research, nerd mode all day. Now, you can still give it your own tone instructions to go have it be its own way, but this I think at least provides a little bit of a simple way to get into a tone that you might want.
Yeah.
Um, there's another big upgrade we haven't mentioned yet, both in creativity as well as coding. So GPT-5 isn't just better at following instructions, it's also the strongest writing collaborator and coding
Hmm.
partner OpenAI has released. So whether you're drafting a polished investor update, brainstorming 10 out of the box marketing ideas, or even building and debugging an app, GPT-5 is noticeably sharper than GPT-4.
And that's a really big deal for entrepreneurs because it means that you can go from idea to prototype much faster. So, whether that prototype is, and I say prototype very loosely, because that could mean a business pitch or it could mean, a website or a piece of software. So instead of waiting on a designer or an engineer for the first draft, ChatGPT-5 can kind of generate a
Mhm.
starting point and then you can refine it with your team or refine it with your designer, your
Yeah.
engineer, or whoever it may be.
Yeah, we haven't really covered coding or,
Yeah.
or prototyping yet. And I feel that needs its own series because,
Mm.
man, do I have thoughts,
Thoughts and feels,
frustrations,
thoughts and feels.
all the feelings here, but lots of learnings too. But I think something that is very cool is you can run code from within ChatGPT 5 now. So
Interesting.
if you ask it to build a wireframe or a mock-up of some app that you want to build, it will write that code and then you can, run that from within ChatGPT. So it's incredibly useful and quick for
Mm.
prototyping and ideating. But please, and I know this is going to get, this could get our audience and, it's definitely going to frustrate developers. Please do not expect that to be production ready or anything remotely usable out in the real world. It's solely a prototype. But that's pretty incredible that you can have an AI helping you prototype a whole app.
Absolutely. As we always say, it still needs that human oversight. It's just a starting point, and then you build
Yeah.
from there. But you've been mostly focusing on ChatGPT
Mm.
5 this week. I know you've been using it a lot and you're getting it
Mhm.
much more familiar with it, which is great. I've been focusing on some other research around prompting. And I think, again, we just need to update some of the advice that
Mhm.
we gave in our original episode because things have definitely moved on.
Well, what did we get wrong?
I mean, I wouldn't say that we got things wrong, just that things have moved on because at the time, way back 3 months ago, you know,
A lifetime ago.
a lifetime ago in AI world, those were kind of the commonly held beliefs about prompting. And it's just that the research has moved on since we last talked about it. So, for example, in our original episode, we talked a lot about role prompting, which was the
Mhm.
idea where you start with, you are a marketing expert or you are a financial advisor, whatever the case may be. And that was a really big part of a lot of the frameworks that we talked about. And again, at the time, that was the kind of commonly talked about method of
Mhm.
prompting.
Well, I'm worried about what you're about to tell me because I try to tell myself to use that all the time. I sometimes go back and say at the first sentence, you are a blank.
Well, unfortunately, it turns out that that's actually largely
Of course.
ineffective. Of course, there has actually been some research that's been done on this, and the research shows that while role prompts might help with the tone or the writing style, so it is still useful in that sense, they have little to no effect on actually improving the factual accuracy. So, in one study, role prompts gave near zero accuracy in medical coding, but just a few examples. boosted the accuracy to 90%. So you're getting different results, and maybe a better tone, but it's not necessarily the more accurate information if you give it a role.
Okay. That's super interesting. So
Yeah.
what actually works then?
So it's called shot prompting. It's essentially just providing examples, which is something that we always recommend anyway. It's providing an example just with a better name. So zero shot prompting is not giving an example. One shot is giving one example. A few shot is giving two or more examples. So it's pretty straightforward. But this way, instead of telling the AI what role to play, you show it examples of exactly what you want. And this is what the research has shown to be incredibly effective.
That's really interesting. So instead of saying you are a financial analyst, you'd say, here are 3 examples of how I want financial summaries formatted, and then show the actual examples.
Exactly. And, this makes sense from a business perspective as well. Like when you're training someone, you don't just say, act like a marketer. You have to show them examples of good work and say, aim to do it like this. And that way they, they learn to understand what good looks like. Because as we know, the AI has every example of ad copy that's ever existed, but it doesn't know what is good ad copy or what is bad ad copy. So you have to be able to guide it in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a much better analogy than the role playing we were advocating before. And that makes a lot of sense if you just, break it down, right?
Absolutely.
And here's what else I think we've learned from testing GPT-5 extensively. Context is even more powerful than we thought. I could go on about this forever.
Yeah, you love to talk about context.
I
Quite
really
rightly
do.
so.
Yeah, but also at the same time, it does need to be structured properly. So just dumping information doesn't quite work.
What do you mean by structured in this context?
Yeah, so the
Context.
most important context first, right? So it is going to prioritize. So most important context first, supporting details second, and then background information last. So you're almost giving it like a prioritization of which information to look at more importantly. Think of it like briefing an executive or your boss or anything like that, or your board. Lead with what matters most, then provide the supporting data behind it. We've learned this from years of presenting to really everyone, right? I think this is how our brain works. Don't bury the lead. You need to give the relevant information up front, and then you can provide kind of the credibility and context after.
I mean, no one's got the attention span for that anymore. Just tell me what it is immediately and let's move on.
Sure.
Yeah. So the other update that I wanted to talk about is called decomposition and self-criticism. And that sounds probably much more complicated than it actually is. Again, decomposition means asking the model to break the problem into sub-problems first, and then you solve each piece of that problem. So instead of asking it to say, create a marketing strategy, I say first identify the 3 biggest challenges in our market, then develop specific tactics for each challenge. So it's essentially just breaking it down a little bit more rather than kind of making it answer everything all at once. You're just giving it kind of bite-sized chunks that allow it to process each of those questions at once.
This just feels like we're starting to get, these LLMs to be more reasoning models that reason the way that we reason through as a human.
Absolutely, because you're never going to look at something like create a marketing plan and just answer it all in one giant brain dump. You're going to think through each aspect of it, and kind of you as a human would break it down into specific things. So why wouldn't we ask the AI to do the same? And then the other aspect of this is self-criticism. And honestly, that's kind of something that you should be doing with your team all the time anyway, which is walk me through this reasoning or what could go wrong with this approach. So you're kind of challenging the AI a bit and pushing it and questioning its responses so that it comes back. You're essentially playing devil's advocate, like, and looking at a marketing plan from all angles rather than just kind of taking whatever it's giving you right off the bat. And this is actually something that ChatGPT-5 is really good at. So for example, after you get an important analysis, ask it to check its own work, grade its own homework. So review the above recommendation and identify any assumptions or areas where additional data would strengthen the conclusion. So again, it's actually just starting to think a little bit more like you would interact with a member of your team.
What I think is so great about this is, and not to toot our own horn, but this goes back to our always be iterating kind of ethos.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It feels as if the model is now starting to really appreciate that kind of human in the loop, that iterative concept. But now I think if we do that, it was very important before, but now because of the way the model's been built and thought to reason, it's going to align even better with that ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's building confidence in the output even more. And sometimes it will reveal insights you hadn't considered. Like, that's one of the reasons why this self-criticism is so great, is because it's asking it to give you a bunch of things that you may not have thought of, with all of its knowledge of, every marketing campaign that's ever existed. So if our original framework needs updating for ChatGPT-5, I wanted to talk about what we're going to call the 4C framework.
Jess, give me, what are the 4 C's?
Okay, so the 4 C's are clear, context, constraints, and calibration. And this is absolutely taking into account ChatGPT-5's issues with precision and that massive context window. So we're really taking advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's start with clear, because I think that's going to be very important to start with.
Absolutely. So unsurprisingly, clear means being really unambiguous with what you want. Because remember, ChatGPT-5 follows instructions precisely. So any contradictions, as we just talked about, will confuse it. This is like managing a really good employee. You want to make sure that you give them really good, clear instructions, including the parts that you didn't mean to ask for, so that it understands and it knows what sort of output you want back.
So instead of summarize this report, I would say create a 3-bullet executive summary highlighting the main financial risks. Got it. So it's just like an intern. If I tell someone, make this better, I get back their interpretation of better, right? But if I say, increase the click-through rate by making the headline more specific and adding urgency, I get exactly what I need, because I've been very clear and precise. I've been very clear about the goal or the objective.
Yeah.
That way that the model isn't interpreting what I need. So the more specific you are about the desired outcome, the better the result is going to be.
Exactly. So the second C is your favorite word. It's context. And this is where ChatGPT-5's massive context window becomes a real game changer for business users. We used to spend forever condensing information before you could even ask for help in and analyzing it. But now you don't need to hold back relevant information. You can literally just dump everything in, and that will help. Well, I say that you want to prioritize it. You want to do all the things that we've just talked about, but it's a much easier way of giving it that context that it needs.
This is great for me, because I need to confess, I've been doing this forever, right? I've just been dumping in everything.
Me too.
And then
actually,
I've had to go back and, try to give it the specific context and be a little bit more discerning, as we've talked about. Now, I'm just throwing all of it in there. But I think I will take the prioritization concept a little bit more seriously. But so for everyone here, what does this look like practically? What's the, relevant information that you should be giving it?
So let's say you're preparing for a board meeting. So instead of spending an hour summarizing all of your materials, you can now just paste them all into ChatGPT-5 and say, create talking points for a 10-minute board presentation covering these key themes. So that means you can give it, a pitch deck, financial data, customer feedback, competitive analysis, anything you think is relevant to that board meeting, you can put in, and it will be able to sort through that information.
That's a huge time saver, not having to kind of pull out the relevant pieces of information. That being said, I still think that if we talk about the prioritization, right? If there's specific data within all of those examples that you've given it that you want it to prioritize, tell it. You need to give it those instructions as well. Just as we talk about, you don't want it to interpret what's important. You want it to tell it what's important. You don't want it to kind of go off on its own. Specific instructions are going to be really, really helpful here. So if the board deck that you're trying to build, you want it to focus on financial data, tell it.
Absolutely. But prioritization doesn't work within the 4 C's. So
yes, it's not as sexy as the 4 C's.
It's not as sexy as the 4 C's. So we're just going to roll that into both clear and context. So
100%.
It'll be the 4 C's plus P, which just doesn't sound as great.
But I think this next C is super interesting because it's kind of a totally new concept.
Yeah. So the third C is constraints. And this is where a marketing background is actually helpful, because if you've ever briefed a designer, briefed an agency, any of that, if you just say, make this look nice, you're going to get their interpretation of what
Hmm.
looks nice. And that might not be bad, but it might not be exactly what you're looking for. So if you specify, the exact colors, the exact dimensions and fonts that you need, the mood, the feel that you want, all of that sounds a little, amorphous and a little vague, but that's going to help the designer
Hmm.
be a little bit more precise in what they're giving back to you. So this is exactly the same concept. You just need to be much more precise in what you're giving it.
Yeah, and you have a lot more experience than I do, but even in my limited experience, for any creative brief, you want to specify deliverables. And I
Yeah,
think that principle
absolutely.
applies here, output as a table with a professional tone, 3 columns, no more than 5 rows. GPT-5 will nail those specifications every time. And it's not just about format. You can use constraints for, constantly for different stakeholders.
Yeah.
The same project update looks completely different when you're presenting to C-suite versus, project team or external partners. If you constrain the tone, the length, the complexity, even the perspective, you're going to get something, just way more useful. Writing this from the customer's point of view or explain this for a non-technical executive audience gives you very different results, which are going to be helpful.
Yeah,
Uh, so,
absolutely.
Jess,
Yes.
what is the last C?
The last C is calibration. And that is all about controlling the depths of analysis. And this is really crucial for business efficiency, because sometimes you need that quick answer that we talked about earlier with ChatGPT-5, and sometimes you need that really deep
Hmm.
analysis. So for quick mode, you could say something like, give me top 3 recommendations in 3 sentences. And for deep mode, think carefully through all the implications and analyze it step by step. So
This change to the model is something that I think is so impactful. I think this is the biggest game changer
I
and has
agree.
really impacted how I work with ChatGPT. It's the difference between asking for a quick status update versus a comprehensive, post mortem or in depth analysis. It was why deep research was so huge, right?
Yeah.
Because I could really delve into a topic. Now I get that same level of kind of control in my day to day. I can ask for something really quick. You gave a great example around the weather. Or I can really go deep. Maybe I want to be really deep about the weather and what are the type of,
I mean,
clouds that are out there.
yeah, that's fair. Some people want to know about that.
But now we have that control. And so I think that's really useful from a user perspective. And unlike GPT-4, GPT-5 reliably respects those calibration cues. So if you say brief, it means brief. If you say
Yeah,
deep, it means deep. And that's really useful as you're going through in your day-to-day prompting.
exactly. So, it's the same information, but just completely different levels of analysis required. And ChatGPT-5 actually really respects those calibration cues, which the older versions often ignored.
Right. So putting it all together,
Yeah.
we have clear, context,
Yeah.
constraints,
Yeah.
calibration. I think
Yeah.
this works for any business communication task, right?
Absolutely. And let's put a P there in brackets at the end around prioritization, so we don't forget that completely.
Mhm.
Um, but that way, whether you're drafting a client proposal or you're analyzing campaign performance or you're writing internal communications, you can use those same frameworks, but really just adjust the specifics. And that's the power of a good framework. That's why we love them so much. They're repeatable, but flexible. And
Mhm.
honestly, it's helped in general too, because I'm much more intentional about how I communicate with people that I'm working with. Like, it does make you, like, anytime you brief someone, it makes you think through
Mhm.
the thing that you're working on yourself, because you need to be able to clearly communicate it. So really, at the end of the day, it just boils down to what we always talk about with prompting, which is it's just good communication. At the
Mhm.
end of the day, that's what it is. Clear communication. Okay. So let's now make this concrete with some real scenarios that our audience might deal with. So, Kyle, Let's suppose you need to analyze why our Q3 sales numbers were disappointing. How would you use the 4 Cs to help you analyze this?
First off, rough start.
Oh,
Rough start.
it's a bad end to the year, you know?
Okay, using the framework.
Yeah.
First off, clear. So identify the top 3 factors that contributed to our 15% shortfall in Q3 sales and recommend specific actions for Q4. I mean, very
Spot
detailed
on.
response
Very
there, right?
clear. Yeah.
Okay. Second part, context. I would include the sales data,
Hmm.
and to our little bracket around P, I would say focus on sales data first and foremost, right? Then I would give pipeline reports, competitive intelligence, maybe some customer feedback.
Mm.
That's all that supporting detail that could
Yeah.
explain why the sales data, is the way that it is. Third, constraints. Format as an executive memo with a professional tone and include some of the supporting data in a summary form. That's giving it really clear cues so that it knows, what to provide and what not to. And then calibrate it, right? So think through this systematically and consider both external and internal factors. So
And
this is where
that's
you're giving it like a really clear, like, kind of what's the space that you need to, involve? How deep or how shallow shall I go in my research?
and that's where something like customer feedback or
Mm.
wider market factors or, whatever is really important to feed it so that it has that
Mhm.
context. And, because of ChatGPT 5's expanded context window, you can include the full quarterly business report rather than just a summary.
Mhm.
Okay, so now let's say your development team is behind on a project and you need to communicate the delay to stakeholders. I think we've all been here, especially if you've ever worked agency side.
Yeah. 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 This one's
This
this
is the
one's also
worst.
tough. This
Oh,
one's
this is
also pretty
brutal.
tough.
No one likes these
Um,
conversations.
which is where, putting this and using ChatGPT is so helpful because you
Yeah.
have a lot of that, like, internal anxiety. This is really about stakeholder management. So going back to our framework, clear, draft 3 versions of a product delay notification, one for the executive team, one for the client, and one for the project team. I love doing this, right? Where you actually give it the audience. So you can tell
Mm.
it like, okay, who's the audience, how to draft it. Secondly, context. So include the original timeline, the current status, reasons for the delay, and then proposed solutions. Third, constraints. So the executive version should be brief and solution focused. The client version should be apologetic but confident, right? That you're actually going to
Yeah.
maybe, right the ship here. And then the team version should be detailed and action oriented. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page, working and, rowing in the same direction. And then lastly, calibration. Think carefully or deeply about each audience's concerns and adjust the message accordingly. So we don't want a shallow response where everything seems similar. You really want it to understand the context and each of those audiences' concerns and then, respond appropriately.
I think this is where the human relationship is really important as well, because you can input something in that calibration section about that particular individual. This would have been so useful when I worked in consulting. I once worked on a data migration project, and the client was lovely, but he had very high expectations. And if you didn't meet those high expectations, he would kind of look at you like you just, kicked a puppy or something. Like, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And, and he's
The worst
so,
words in the human
oh
language.
God, it was so hard to, oh man, he's so lovely, but wow, that was a tough project. And so, you know, if we had AI at this point in time,
Mhm.
I absolutely would have been using this to rewrite emails to him to try and avoid that
Yeah.
disappointed look on his face, because it's devastating. It was devastating.
Well, and also you would probably include not, when you talk about calibration, you would include kind of how that person usually approaches it and what your
Exactly.
view is.
Yeah.
And that would definitely help, calibrate again that response. And this is
100%.
what I love about this approach so much, right? It forces you to think strategically about that communication before you start writing. You talk about how do we become better communicators? Think strategically about the objective, what information you're trying to give, and then what objective you're trying to get out of that communication. That really helps you kind of ideate. So I think the 4C framework isn't just about prompting AI
Yeah.
better. It's, again, like you said, being a better communicator, period.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's do one more. Let's look
Mhm.
at a financial scenario. So let's say you need to prepare for investor discussions about fundraising.
Oh, I
This
mean,
is
this is
this is
where
your dream
this
scenario.
well, this is like my everyday, right? This is just
Yeah,
this
exactly.
or maybe my nightmare. I don't know, one or the other. But, this is where context really shines. And so I love this example. So first, let's start with clear, create an investor ready financial summary that positions our growth trajectory and our funding needs. Classic give and take, right?
Yeah.
But here's where context is so clutch. Include P&L statements, cash flow projections, market size data. I mean, throw in competitor funding rounds, growth metrics.
Mm,
I mean, this is where you can give it so much business context
yeah.
that is very difficult to kind of take all of that and discern into a proper narrative. Um, then I would give it constraints, 1 page summary with a supporting appendix. I want it to be confident but realistic tone, or maybe I want to be actually like, I want to be really positive.
Yeah.
That's something that, you kind of have to infuse a little bit of
Look,
excitement, right?
fake it till you make it when you're fundraising.
Yeah, I mean, fundraising decks really have a lot of nuance in how you
Yeah.
explain that narrative. This constraint component in our framework is really helpful around that. And then I'm going to tell it to focus on scalability metrics that matter to VCs. So that audience has a very clear directive. They're looking for very specific things. The training data is there to give the model a way for it to calibrate that. So do it. And then lastly, speaking of calibration, anticipate tough questions about burn rate and path to profitability. This is where you might be able to kind of give it a little bit of a clue or some contextual clues around, okay, this is what might come up based on where we're at. And I want to be, buttoned up around this.
And with ChatGPT-5's reasoning capabilities, you could even add something like, identify potential investor objections and prepare responses. You can start almost negative prompting in a way where
Mhm.
you're really playing devil's advocate and making it think about what could be wrong with this deck as well.
That's such a great example. I ask it to come up with questions all the time that I need to be
Yeah.
prepared for. So, and not just the questions, but the answers too, right? So,
Yeah.
kind of start preparing yourself mentally for what's going to come. I think this is true for investor decks, sales pitches. Any type of conversation you're having, kind of understanding the give and the take is really good. So, again, it's not just summarizing data which is very useful, taking all of that
Yeah.
context, but it's actually thinking strategically about the conversation you're about to have and preparing yourself for it.
I think that's very smart.
Okay, cool.
Right. So moving on to AI news that matters. This week, everyone has been talking about the State of AI in Business 2025 report. That's a bit of a
Mhm.
mouthful. And honestly, the reason why everyone's been talking about it is because the headline is pretty shocking. And that is that 95% of generative AI pilots are failing.
Mhm.
And there's been a lot of people who have been happy about this. There's been some people who have been unhappy about this. I think the enterprise companies that have spent a lot of money on this are probably not too thrilled. But I think it's both a wake up call and it's kind of a validation of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about
Mhm.
on early adopters. So this is a very interesting report.
Totally. That headline number is brutal.
Yeah.
95% of Gen AI pilots are failing.
95%.
But here's the thing, I know this is going to sound crazy. I'm so excited about this number, right? I think it represents an opportunity here. That failure rate hides a huge opportunity for smaller, scrappier businesses. And we talk about the democratization of AI.
Yeah.
I think underlying that stat is this democratization idea.
I absolutely agree with you because, this isn't just about big tech companies or Fortune 500 enterprise companies. I think this report surveyed over 1,000 business leaders across companies of all sizes. And what it shows is that the approach to AI adoption matters way more than the size of your
Mhm.
budget. And I actually think the bigger your budget, probably the more issues you're going to have with all of
Yep.
this.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic boil the ocean, right? You're trying
Yeah.
to solve for everything. And how many times have we seen in the news saying we're going to replace all our people? that's, as we're finding, not a very successful approach. And I think what's really fascinating, and this connects directly back to our episodes with Sean about AI policy, the report found that companies without established AI guidelines saw failure rates approaching 98%. So
That
basically,
is
if
not
you don't,
good.
if you didn't have an established AI guideline, you failed, right? I
Yeah.
mean, 2% is nothing. But companies with even basic AI policies, and we're talking simple one-page documents, something very basic, had success rates 4 times higher.
And I think that actually just takes us right back to today's main topic about prompt engineering, because the report shows that 66% of executives want AI systems that learn from feedback, and successful AI implementations are strongly correlated with teams that have proper prompt engineering training, because you're going to get the most out of your tools if you know how to communicate with them. So companies that invested in teaching their people how to communicate effectively with AI tools dramatically outperformed those that just bought an expensive AI software and hoped for the best.
Mm-hmm. And what I think validates, our approach is, external partnerships with learning capable, customized tools reach deployment 67% of the time, compared to just 33% for internally built tools. So companies seeing the highest ROI are using AI for basic tasks like content creation, customer service, and data analysis, not building complex autonomous systems or, agentic AI and trying to replace entire job functions or people.
Yeah, I think that this is a really important part of this, because it's almost like you're running before you can walk, right? So you're jumping straight into the incredibly complicated stuff before you have the basics. But I
Mhm.
think there's also, a stat in here that directly supports what we've talked about today with the few shot prompting versus the role
Mm.
prompting. Companies that use example-based prompting techniques saw 20% better results through systematic approaches to validation and verification than those using the basic act like an expert approach.
Mhm. And the part that should give, our audience of operators, entrepreneurs, small business listeners confidence, mid-market companies moved faster and more decisively.
Yeah.
Top performers of that group reported average timelines of 90 days from pilot to full implementation. Enterprises, by comparison, took 9 months longer. So while large enterprises are spending millions on failed AI pilots, smaller businesses with focused approaches are seeing measurable results within months.
So the report also found that 90% of employees use LLMs regularly for work, while only 40% of companies have purchased official LLM subscriptions, which
That's that
perfectly,
secret AI
it's the shadow AI again.
or shadow
This,
AI.
yeah, this is absolutely validates what we talked about with Sean when it comes to shadow AI
Mhm.
adoption. Employees are using AI tools, whether companies have policies or not, whether you like it or not. And, the question is whether leadership is actually going to guide that usage or just hope for the best.
And this is what I love so much about this report is that it shows that, your AI success isn't about having the biggest budget or the fanciest tools. It's about having the right fundamentals in place. So proper prompting, clear policies, human oversight, right?
Yep.
As we
That's a
constantly
big
talk
one.
about, but also realistic expectations about what AI can and can't do. Don't boil the ocean. Solve a really clear, distinctive pain point.
Yeah. And, for our listeners who might be feeling a little bit behind because they haven't started their AI transformation yet, this report actually shows that you're perfectly positioned. You can learn from all of these enterprise mistakes
Mhm.
without having had to spend the millions and millions, and implement AI the right way from the beginning, because you
Mhm.
don't need to spend millions and millions to implement AI and have it be useful for your business.
Yep. And remember, we are early adopters. So we talk about the adoption
Yeah,
curve. I think we're about to enter into the trough of disillusionment, right? The time
absolutely.
where
Yeah.
people are starting to now question that this is going to become a thing. But we talk about it all the time. This is a transformational shift, just like the internet. It's not going to go away, even though a lot of the companies that started early may not survive this process. So the takeaway is really clear, master the basics. You have time. We have time to figure this whole thing out. So those basics, prompt engineering, build an AI policy, look at, human in the loop, keeping human oversight. That's how you're going to join the successful 5% instead of maybe the 95% who are burning cash and millions of dollars through these expensive implementations.
Yeah, and we were talking about this before the podcast started because we were talking about this report, but the internet didn't go anywhere because the dot-com bubble burst, right? Like, you can't put the AI genie back in the bottle. There's been too much time and money and effort spent on it, but the hype will die down. And actually, as you say, this trough of disillusionment is coming. This is where people are going to start being a little bit more realistic about it and not expecting AI to be able to come in and you can automate everything immediately. Like, it's just not going to work that way. But honestly, this validates everything that we've been saying on early adopter from the very first episode. Start simple, get good at the fundamentals, establish the proper frameworks, and then you can scale, because the companies that are trying to skip these steps and just jump straight in at the deep end are the ones that are going to be filling up that 95% failure rate. And definitely go back and listen to our AI policy episodes with Sean, because we cover all of these topics in great detail.
Yeah, so important.
So yeah, very much so.
All right, time for our favorite segment, AI gone wrong. And this week's story is a perfect example of what happens when companies put the cart before the horse with AI adoption.
Oh yeah, I mean, this one's perfect timing after that report from MIT. So the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, for once we're moving away from the US, decided that they were going to be very clever, and they were going to replace 45 customer service workers with an AI-powered bot. They announced this big layoff, claimed that their, shiny new chat bot had reduced call volume significantly, and that the human workers were now essentially redundant.
But here's where it gets good. The workers' union called bullshit on this immediately. Can I say bullshit? Anyway.
Absolutely. Nothing's ever stopped me from swearing.
So they took the bank to a workplace relations tribunal because the employees on the ground were saying that call volumes are actually increasing, not decreasing.
And they were right. The union found that not only were call volumes going up, but that the bank was literally scrambling to manage the situation by offering staff overtime and even getting team leaders to jump on some customer service calls because the AI bot was so bad at its job, which I'm sure leadership was thrilled about, to be doing customer service calls.
Yeah, for sure. So the bank had to come crawling back to those 45 workers, some of whom had been with the company for decades, and essentially say, oops, our bad. We didn't, adequately consider all relevant business considerations, or maybe didn't test this properly, which is basically corporate speak for, our AI chatbot is terrible and we need you to come back, hopefully for a little bit more money. A lot of
Hopefully,
money.
Probably unlikely. I think what kills me about this story is how predictable it was. This is not the first time we've seen this happen, and it connects directly back to what we just talked about with that MIT report. The bank made every classic mistake. They didn't test properly. They didn't have a backup plan. They fired people before they knew the AI even worked. Like, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and let's talk about the human cost here. 45 people suddenly faced unemployment. Who knows what kind of struggles they went through, paying their bills, having their lives turned upside down, especially if you'd been there for
the stress
decades.
of that. Oh my God.
Yeah, and all because some executives got excited about an AI demo without doing like the proper due diligence on the tool.
Tech sales execs have a lot to answer for, honestly, because you put them in a room with a CEO and they get all excited about the cost savings. Yeah, they really do. But this is exactly why we keep preaching, start simple and test thoroughly, because if the bank had run the voice bot alongside their human agents for a few months, they could have quickly discovered it wasn't ready for prime time. They could have, tested those edge cases. They could have given it time to adapt and everyone to transfer over. And instead, they went straight to the fire everyone and let AI handle it because it's going to save us money.
Yeah. And I've spoken to a lot of CEOs who, and I'm not saying it's the CEO fault, because I think we're hearing this narrative out in the world. But, you hear constantly, well, how can I use AI, or how can I use agentic AI to replace, my people or help my margin, right? Because your objectives are either very, top line focused or margin focused. And so, we're hearing a lot of this in the behind the scenes. But I think the business lesson is, this kind of AI gone wrong story, destroys trust internally. Those 45 workers who got their jobs back, I mean, they have zero reason to trust management.
Zero.
Your entire organization now is going to have a lot of friction towards any future AI initiatives, because now you've basically created the idea of any AI initiative is going to reduce people's jobs. So rather than now use AI responsibly, you're going to constantly be facing internal friction. Now, the irony is AI chatbots can be incredibly helpful for customer service, when implemented correctly. We've covered successful examples on
Yeah.
the show, but you start with handling simple queries while humans handle complex ones. You want to test extensively. You want to look at how the human and the AI can work kind of in conjunction to get the best customer chatbot experience. And then you scale that gradually.
Exactly. So you use AI to augment your team first, not replace them entirely. And then you let it handle what are your hours questions so your human agents can focus on the complex problem
Mhm.
solving that actually requires empathy and or critical thinking.
Yeah. So the moral of this story is very simple. Don't
Yeah.
fire your entire customer service team for a chatbot you haven't properly tested. You know,
Yeah,
and maybe that should be obvious, but I think there are so many promises out in the world for some of these AI tools.
totally.
Again, I'll go back to the AI SDR. Replace your entire sales team with this chatbot that does a million different things. Um, so I think it does need to be said that this is not really, the best use case for AI right now.
You really hate those AI SDRs. I don't
I
disagree
just
with you, but you
I
really
just see
hate.
so many of
Yeah.
them, so many of them.
Yeah, I agree. And, if you're a business leader thinking about AI adoption, really think of this as a cautionary tale because that MIT report shows 95% pilot failure and it's real companies making real mistakes that hurt real people, but also it's wasting money. And we know how much companies
Mhm.
love to waste money.
But I'll throw in a quick caveat to that, which is, don't lose, don't overreact to the news either. Don't lose hope in what AI
Yeah.
can achieve. There are some great things that will come out of this, especially as we continue to progress the technology. All right, 3 quick wins you can implement today from this week's episode. So, quick win number 1, replace role prompting with few shot examples. So, instead of you are a marketing expert, show ChatGPT-5 2 or 3 examples of the exact output you want.
Quick win number 2, use the full context window. So you can stop summarizing documents just for AI. You can include the full documents and you just let ChatGPT synthesize them.
Quick win number 3, start adding calibration cues. This one's big. So,
Mm.
for quick tasks, say brief response or 3 key points. For complex analysis, say think step by step or consider all implications.
And remember, these aren't actually just AI tips. They're communication principles that are going to make you better at managing people or managing your agencies or, whatever the
Mhm.
case may be. It's all about good communication.
Right, you are. Okay. If you take one thing from today's episode, make it this: GPT-5 isn't just faster than previous versions, it's fundamentally different. It requires cleaner, more intentional prompting, and ultimately better communication.
Make sure you use the 4C framework: clear, context, constraints, calibration. It works for any business communication task, whether you're using AI or managing people, and also any tool. We've talked a lot about ChatGPT in this particular episode, but this is going to be relevant for any of the tools that you're using.
And our little caveat of
Yeah.
prioritization within that
Yes,
context.
yes, yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Prioritization.
Okay, an additional thing, we've recently launched our Substack. So we want to
Yes,
start
we
getting
have.
people to join our Substack. So what we're going to do is we are going to put all of our prompt engineering tool tips, suggestions, recommendations, and some of the frameworks that we use constantly. We're going to put that in our Substack so you guys can have like a how-to guide. So make sure you go over to Substack, subscribe to Early Adopter, and check us out over there.
I will put those links in the show notes as well. So you have the links to our Substack, but also the links to our social media. We are at early_adopter on all of our social media as well. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, we're on YouTube. We're everywhere, basically. You can't get rid of us. And also make sure to share your wins with us at hello@earlyadopter, no E in the adopter.ai.
So thanks for listening to Early Adopter, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Kyle. See you next week.
Why can't I